Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tumble Tune-up. I just wanted to start off by saying this is the first one on Zoom, and I know that the time isn't really convenient for people, so I do apologize for that if you wanted to watch live. Um, it's just the way the things are set up right now, and I will try and find a better time going forward where people can attend if they would like to. But I am really pleased to be recording on Zoom. I just think it makes things a little bit easier than messing around with Facebook. So this will be the plan going forward. Um, so yeah, I've got lots to talk about today. Thank you for the people who contributed some of their headaches, and there's some really good ones actually. So it's going to be quite nice to go through those. I just wanted to start with some weekly wins because it's quite nice to be able to talk about things that are going well. And if you've had some weekly wins, I'm going to be sharing this to YouTube, but it'd be great if you could drop any of your weekly wins in the comments on YouTube or in the comments on Facebook when I share it as a link. So first off, the AEC girls are coming back from the Infinity Finals, and they're coming back as champions. Um, and it's just been lovely because the two head coaches for that team are in their early 20s, and they've come through the program, and it's just really nice when you kind of get that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, um when you've got this kind of recycling element to your program where you've got the athletes coming through, they become coaches and then they're coaching the next generation. So it's like a self-sustaining thing, isn't it? And it's just really nice when that's happening. So we've had our first American team for a while, and they've gone out and they've won a first place trophy, and it's going to mean so much for them, lifelong memories, but also it's nice for the gym as well because it kind of just raises the whole culture of the gym. So that's been great. And actually, the confidence in the gym at the moment has been really good. There's been some wonderful tumble progressions. Um, and when you just feel like the culture is right. So that's been really good as well. And then on a personal level, um, I've been really thinking about the way I deliver sessions lately. And it's quite nice when you feel like the impact is different, or when you feel like the athletes can see that you're trying to be different and you're trying to meet them in different ways. Um, and it yeah, it's just felt really good to kind of look at your performance and think, well, I did that differently this time and this outcome was different. So um yeah, they're my weekly wins. It would be lovely to hear yours. So please do share them because um I don't hear enough of them, and it would be lovely to hear them. Um okay, so let's talk about what the tune-ups are, or what tune-ups I've been asked for, or what headaches I've been asked to talk about. The first one is balancing athletes' desires. The second one is mental blocks. The third one is straight legs during performance, and then the fourth one is transitioning from the mat to the floor. And actually, these are all quite different to ones that I've spoken about before, so it'll be quite nice to talk about these. I'm going to talk about tumble tech and progression and managing an athlete's desire. Um, Managing athletes' ambitions are hard because you'll have some athletes who are super ambitious and they want to be pushing their skills all the time, next stage, next level, next skill. And then you'll have other athletes who are a little bit more laid back. And both of those can be super frustrating because you're trying to hold the athlete who wants to really push on and get them to master that technique. And then the other side, you've got an athlete who maybe has great potential or um, should be doing better. And they're just kind of like, well, I'm here for the vibes. Um, and that's a different discussion altogether, I guess, because they are paying customers and it's a buyer's market, isn't it? And they can kind of, it's difficult when it's kind of like, well, I'm here because I like the social aspect. And then you've got the other side where I'm here and I want to be an elite all-star. So those two things can be quite challenging to manage anyway. But in terms of the athletes who are super ambitious, I do think that a clear gym culture is really important, or a clear route for progression, with standards and thresholds along the way, um, will help with managing those athletes' expectations. So, for example, um, let's just say your athlete has a round off back handspring. They're like, okay, I've got my round off back handspring now. I want to learn how to tuck. Now, I can see the mindset on that. I've got this skill and now I want to learn this skill. But there also needs to be sort of like thresholds for that, doesn't there? So, yes, it's great you have a round off back handspring, but you need to be able to do round off back handspring to three. So, three back handsprings in the series before we even consider learning how to do a tuck. And that's the type of thing that's going to frustrate an ambitious athlete. But that is the reality of progression, isn't it? And with that, to be able to then push on for the tuck, they need to be able to understand that their feet positioning changes for a back handspring than it does for a tuck. So the feet in front for a back handspring series, and then the feet come out behind when they're setting for a tuck. So they need to learn loads before they're even ready to start thinking about tucking and rotating. Um, so I would definitely say a clear route for progression, and a culture that everyone is aware of, even if they're not completely satisfied with it. And then, like I said, clear thresholds that the athlete needs to meet before they are then able to push on for the next skill in whatever they're working towards. I would also say, it's really important that you get the parents on side too. Um, so educate them in terms of this is what is going to be happening. This is how we do tumble here. This is what we have laid out, and this is what athletes need to be doing before we consider them for the next skill. And I think that will help because sometimes you have ambitious parent athletes, but that is also kind of encouraged by their parents as well. Well, you've got your back handspring, so you should be working your tuck now. Um, that can cause anxiety too, and I will talk about mental blocks, but um, it might be worth looking at how you educate the parents in terms of the way that you teach tumble too. And ironically, I have just done a video on how parents um, can best support their athletes, and I'll make sure I put that in a link somewhere around the screen. I don't know how YouTube works yet. I'm getting better at it though. But I'll make sure that you can have a look at that too. Um, all right, so in terms of mental blocks, I want to start off by a disclaimer right off the bat. I am not a sports psychologist. All right, so as much as I have worked with hundreds of athletes and lots of them have mental blocks or anxieties or performance anxieties and fear, um, I would still want to make it very clear that I'm not a sports psychologist, and I would absolutely recommend Jeff Benson on this, who is probably the leading cheer sports psychologist, and he has a book that's called Unblock 2. I've recommended this book to everyone, but I don't have any, it's not like I get commission for that. I just think it's a fantastic book, and I would highly recommend it. The book is written as you know, a sort of very linear, but it has sort of three pathways within each chapter that is geared towards athletes, coaches, and parents. And I just think it's a fantastic read. And I think it can really help um, with athletes who have blocks and just in terms of what your role can be and how you can support them, regardless of whether you're a parent or a coach. Um, I would also like to say that not everything is a mental block. So some of it might be fear. So I've had athletes come to work with me and say, I want to learn my tuck. And I'm like, okay, so what happened for you to lose it or for you not to be able to perform it? And they'll be like, oh, I've never had a tuck. I'm like, well, that's not a block then, you're scared. So I think having a discussion with athletes about whether they really do have a block or a performance anxiety, or if they're just scared. And I think that if they're scared, it's because they need more familiarizing with the skill. A block is something completely different. So in terms of what I would do to work with an athlete who has a block, and this would be if I was working with my own athletes as well, um, I would recommend a change of space. I think sometimes in a certain space, there might be certain, and I don't want to say traumas might sound really harsh, right? But there might be certain traumas associated with a space. So, for example, let's just say a sprung floor at AEC's gym, an athlete does a round off back handspring, back tuck, bails and lands on the back and hurts their leg. The leg comes over the top and they kick the floor over their head and they hurt their foot or their toe or something like that. That's quite a traumatic thing anyway, but then also hurting themselves in that space will add this sort of like subliminal message in the brain as well. And that can then cause them to freeze in that space. So I would definitely recommend maybe trying out a different space or working in a different gym, not as a preempt to leaving, but just as something that might help them overcome what their anxiety is in that space that they've hurt themselves or they've had the anxiety become apparent. They might have been shouted at, or they might have been asked to perform the skill and they didn't feel like they could do it and they felt like everyone was watching them. Like anything can happen that would cause a block. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. So I would definitely recommend a change of space. Um, and like I said, I would also speak to the athlete and see what the root of that anxiety might be, because it might not always be that they're worried about hurting themselves. It might be they're worried what people will think. It might be they're worried that a coach might shout at them. It might be what they're worried that an athlete might say something about them because they're not doing their bit for the team. It might be because they're worried about getting in the car afterwards, and the first thing their parents are going to say to them is, "Did you tuck today?" Like there is a lot more that can cause a block than we realize. And it's not always just physically cheerleading. Athletes can get blocks if their parents split up. The stress of their lives can find its way into the gym. So the mental block is bigger than just the skill, I think, and that's sometimes that we need to make sure we pay attention to. Um, and then in terms of what I do in terms of practically working with an athlete, I always put no time scale on a skill. So I'm not saying you need this by nationals, and I think that helps because again, it's that pressure of I need to do this by this time. Otherwise, I'm a failure. I'm the worst athlete in the world. So when an athlete is going through these moments, I never put a time scale on it. I'm not saying I need this by this time. So I completely strip that back straight away. Um, and then when I'm working with them, I always try to add humor to my coaching anyway, but I do think that if you can kind of make it a little bit more lighthearted and a little bit less of like a big deal, um, I do think that helps. And then the other one that I would use, and I think I posted this actually on my social media the other day, was I make athletes run. So I take away their thinking time. So for example, I had an athlete working around off flip tuck. I made her start on one side of the floor. She had to run to where the beginning of the mats were so she could perform her skill. She had to clean and she had to go. And so what I wanted to do there was take away that part where the athlete just stands there and they're kind of like, "Ooh, stop." And then they clean and then they don't do anything. Then they twiddle their feet, they sort out their hair, they clean they pull their top back, whatever it is that they're doing. Um, that all goes out the window because that becomes learned and that becomes muscle memory and that becomes this kind of like psychological thing where the brain's like, oh, okay, I need to do this for 5 minutes before I do anything now. And so you need to take that away. So the athlete starts on one side of the floor, they run, jog, whatever, clean and go. And actually, I've found that has been probably one of my most successful approaches to dealing with blocks. And I have done this with dozens of athletes now. I kind of stumbled upon it by accident a couple of years ago, and I can't even remember how it all came about. But what I can say is, in terms of getting athletes to be able to just go into an autopilot, because I always say to them, your brain has not forgotten your body has not forgotten how to do this skill, right? Your muscles still know how to twitch in the right spaces and to contort to the right shapes, right? It's your brain sending messages like, uh-oh, this is not okay. So by trying to rewire that with the run and the focus then all changes on movement, I've found that movement initially, the running, then makes it easier to move into the tumble skill. And that is a sword I'm willing to die on because, like I said, I've seen the evidence of this impact above everything else, above the timescales, above the humor. This has been the strongest tool I've had in terms of um, getting athletes to overcome their anxieties. And then the other ways, I suppose, the more sort of common ways would be just take everything back to drills and get them to think about the individual components of the skill and not just think about the whole thing as a tuck, right? It's an angle out of the back handspring. It's the set shape. It's making sure you drive your shins over the head, and just breaking down the skill so that the athlete is more familiar with all the individual components of the skill. Because sometimes the fear can derive from the fact that they're just pulling a tuck, and actually there's so much more they should be doing. So yeah, those are the four things I think I wanted to talk about most, but especially movement before movement, I think has really helped the most. Um, and then all of the other things are absolutely useful as well. All right. I got asked about straight legs in routines. I think the sentence went something like They have lovely legs when they're practicing, when they do them in isolation, and then as soon as it comes to a routine or a full out, the legs are awful. Um, which I think is something we can all relate to. If it's not a flexibility issue, it's probably a fitness issue. And so what's happened is your athlete has just done, I don't know, an opening bit of choreography, stunt one, jumped, and then they've got to do their back walk over, switch kick. So they're probably heaving at this point. They're probably quite tired, as well as anyone that it's almost like you have to choreograph breathing in a routine nowadays because they're so dense with just routine stuff. So, you know, again, it's running. So I'm sorry about that if running is not a coaching tool you would like to use. But I had the same issue with pyramid a few years ago. I'm not going to talk about I will talk about tumbling as well, but sorry, the message has come up on my phone, on my laptop. Right. Where was I? Yes, I'm going to talk about pyramid, but I'll also talk about tumble run because the tumble run came after the pyramid. My team went through a phase. I had a senior two team that were absolutely incredible, and they won so many competitions. And without sounding like I'm being sort of egocentric, they should have won more than they actually did. And part of it was because they had a problem with pyramid, and it wasn't that they had a problem with pyramid; it was that they had a problem with fitness. So I was umming and ahhing about how I could approach this, and I was like, I'm just going to make them run. They're knackered. I'm just going to make them run. So one of the things I used to make them do is I'd start the routine and they basically start in a line at the front of the floor and they just ran as fast as they could for I don't know, a minute and 45 seconds. No one was allowed to be overlapped, burpees, all that type of stuff, right? And they just had to run for 1.5 minutes. And then literally as they were about to collapse, they'd have to build that pyramid. And I found that really helped actually because it was training to coach tired, right? Because technique doesn't get tired, but athletes do, right? So I was kind of put them in a spot where they had to be technically excellent in a time where they were absolutely exhausted. And that really helped with performance on the floor. It also helped with their performance as well. But it also meant that then I could train to go straight into their tumble runs. And a lot of the time it was like from a round off back handspring, step out, back walk over, back handspring. So then was where I was seeing my dodgy legs. So it really helped to make them perform tired. And I wouldn't recommend you do it like 5 times a session or something like that. But it did really help with them being technically better because they had to work harder to be technically better. And that was including the pyramid, but particularly in the tumble runs where, back in those days, I think it was out of five, wasn't it? And they would be getting 4.9 and it would always, it'd always be like the easy out. So it'd be like a body control 0.1. I don't know, straighten your legs and your back handspring. One of those ones where you're kind of like, come on. But you couldn't give a five, so you had to deduct somewhere, and body control was the easy one, wasn't it? But yeah, so I do think making them run. So that's two running strikes today. There's no more running talk, I promise. But yeah, so that's what I would do for straight legs. I would make them run. If it's not a flexibility issue, make them run and then perform. And if you don't want to make them run for a whole routine, you can get them. One of the things that we do is do relays. So they all start on one side of the floor. So this is front to back, not side to side, front of the floor, and there might be two or three people in a line. And the first athlete will sprint down, sprint back, clean, back walk over, and then the next person can go. And that's quite a nice way because then it's like a competition, but also there's like a technical element as well because they're getting exhausted, they're getting tired, or they're breathing heavy before they perform the tumble. So that's been pretty useful as well. And then the final one was transitioning from the mat to the floor. I think the question was something like, my athlete can perform the tuck lovely on the mats, but as soon as transition to the floor, it's like all of their confidence goes. And that's usually that's not an unusual thing, is it? Because the mats do provide an element of comfort. There's an element of protection there. I mean, one of the things I do say to athletes before they go on to perform a skill is that the mats actually take away from you. As much as they might add a layer of protection, they do actually take away some of your natural spring and your natural talent off the floor. So I am of the school of teaching on mats first, because I do think it builds confidence. But I also can see that it can take away confidence when they have to go back to something that's a little bit more sturdy. So one of the things I do first is mats. And then so this is round off back handspring on the line of maybe four mats, round off back handspring tuck. And then what I do is I turn the mats sideways so they're no longer connected. And then what I'll have the athlete do is go round off, but their hands go on the mat and then their feet go in the gap. That's the round off. And then their hands go on the mat for the back handspring, and then their feet go in the gap, which of them is the floor, and then they rebound onto the mat. And then they will do that again, but with the tuck. And then basically what I do is I gradually just take away mats. So then it'll be like a round off, but the mat's still there for the round off. And then I take away the back handspring mat and I spot them or assist them onto a mat, take away the round off mat, and then I assist them onto so round off back handspring, then I assist them onto the mat. And then from there, if I can, I will start to thin the mats out. So if it's a confidence issue or a height issue, they might start on two mats. Then I'll take it down to one mat. And then if I can, I'll use one of my panel mats or another sort of thin mat that I've got so that I'm gradually getting close to the floor and something that's a little bit harder. But that would be my progression for transitioning from the mat to the floor. So I think that's everything in terms of the four questions I was asked to talk about. Um, just going forward with the Tumble Hub, um, the next tune-up will be in June, so I will ask for questions or headaches towards the end of May. There will be more vids going up on YouTube, and please keep sharing the ones that are there, especially the ones that are aimed at parents. I'm looking to get my drill squad girls in for the technical videos, so I will put a request out for what skills people would like me to be focusing on. The speaker I had lined up for May can't do May, but we are looking to have her do a talk in June, and that's going to be on injury prevention. So I'll get a date as soon as possible for that, but I will look to try and get a speaker in for May. I'm going to have a look around and see who's available and see if we can get someone in for that. And the next newsletter will have a request for dates for next season. So, we'll have a first refusal for dates for next season. So, if you are on the Tumble Hub newsletter, as you should be, and you're receiving it, there will be a first sort of like refusal or a request for dates next season if you would like any tumble clinics. And yeah, I'm really trying to push YouTube at the moment and trying to get more extended and more useful content out there. As I say, please keep sharing, and it's always a pleasure to be able to speak and work with you. So please drop me messages or comments on the Tumble Hub, and I'll do my best to go through anything that you would like me to go through. But other than that, appreciate you being here or watching, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.